Somewhere beneath the cobblestones of a modern city, buried under centuries of silence, lies the foundation of the most powerful empire the world has ever known. It began as nothing more than a cluster of mud huts on the banks of a river, tended by shepherds who could not have imagined what their descendants would one day build. For over 1,000 years, Rome ruled continents, commanded oceans, and shaped the very language of civilization itself. Yet its true origins remain wrapped in myth, mystery, and unanswered questions. Emperors rose to divine glory and fell to whispered conspiracies. Legions marched into forests and vanished without a trace, and entire cities were swallowed by the earth in a single breathless afternoon. The roads they paved still carry footsteps today. The laws they wrote still govern nations, and the questions they left behind still haunt the minds of historians across the centuries. This is not simply the story of an empire. This is the story of humanity itself, told through fire, ambition, genius, and the long, quiet shadow Rome cast upon every civilization that followed.
Welcome back, dear traveller, to another quiet journey through the ancient world. Tonight, we walk the streets of Rome. Before we begin, we would love to know, what time is it where you are, and where in the world are you watching from? If you enjoy long, calm histories like this one, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It means more than you know. And as you settle in tonight, we leave you with one question to carry into your dreams. If the greatest empire in history could fall, what does that tell us about the civilizations we build today? Now, close your eyes, breathe slowly, and let the story of Rome begin.
Chapter 1. The Eternal City. Legend, mystery, and the birth of Rome. Somewhere along the winding curves of the Tiber River, on a cluster of gentle hills rising above a fertile plain, one of history's greatest cities quietly began. Long before marble temples and triumphal arches, there were only small thatched huts, firelight, and the soft rains fall as a world still finding its shape. Archaeological evidence from the Palatine Hill reveals human settlement stretching back to the Bronze Age, centuries before any legend was spoken. Roman mythology offered a far more dramatic explanation for the city's birth. Twin brothers, Romulus and Remus, were said to be sons of Rhea Silvia, a Vestal virgin, and Mars, the god of war himself. When the usurper king Amulius learned of their birth, he ordered the infants cast away to perish, either on the slopes of the Palatine Hill or into the Tiber's dark current. Yet, according to legend, something extraordinary intervened. The twins were rescued and suckled by a she-wolf at a cave known as the Lupercal. A shepherd named Faustulus later discovered the boys and raised them alongside his wife, Acca Laurentia. Ancient writer Livy himself noted that the word for she-wolf, lupa, also carried another meaning in Latin, suggesting the nurse may have been a woman rather than a wild animal. Even in antiquity, the line between symbol and history was already beautifully blurred. As young men, Romulus and Remus avenged their grandfather Numitor, overthrew the usurper Amulius, and restored the rightful king to Alba Longa. They then resolved to found a city of their own.
each brother sought divine signs. Romulus counted 6 birds, Remus 12, and from that disputed omen a fatal quarrel grew. In the confrontation that followed, Remus was killed, and Romulus alone gave the new settlement on the Palatine Hill a name: Rome. The traditional date was April 21st, 753 BC. Beneath the legend, the earth itself preserves a quieter story. Iron Age hut foundations uncovered on the Palatine Hill, oval structures of wattle and daub with thatched roofs, confirm human habitation from the 9th and 8th centuries BC. A low stone enclosure, interpreted by ancient sources as the earliest wall of Romulus, has been identified as the first architectural framework from which Rome's urban nucleus grew. The Capitoline Hill holds even older traces, with Bronze Age layers dated to the 12th century BC. Rome did not rise in isolation. To the north, a powerful civilization had already flourished for centuries, the Etruscans, who called themselves the Ravenna. By the 8th and 7th centuries BC, they had built sophisticated city-states, mastered metalworking and maritime trade, and developed an artistic tradition of remarkable refinement. Their origins remain debated. Ancient writers claimed Lydian ancestry, while modern DNA analysis points to indigenous Italian roots emerging from the Iron Age Villanovan tradition. Wherever they came from, their influence on Rome would prove profound. The Etruscan contribution to early Rome was vast and enduring. From 616 to 509 BC, Etruscan-influenced kings ruled the city, introducing the arch and vault, sophisticated drainage systems, and the organized forum. Etruscan religious practices, augury and haruspicae, became woven into Roman governance so deeply that the Senate regularly consulted Etruscan priests. Temple architecture, with high podiums and tripartite layouts, the fasces as a symbol of authority, and the ceremonial triumph all flowed from Etruscan hands into the heart of Roman identity. Rome's legendary kings each left a distinct imprint on the growing city. Numa Pompilius established Rome's religious framework, founding priestly colleges, creating the Vestal Virgins, and reorganizing the calendar into a 12-month system that introduced January and February. Tullus Hostilius expanded Rome through warfare against Alba Longa, Fidene, and Veii, building the first Senate house. Ancus Marcius founded the port of Ostia and constructed the first bridge across the Tiber. Each reign quietly transformed a hillside settlement into something resembling a city. The fifth king, Tarquinius Priscus, was the first Etruscan to rule Rome. He constructed the Cloaca Maxima drainage system, designed the Circus Maximus, and laid foundations for the great temple of Jupiter on the Capitoline Hill. His wife Tanaquil, skilled in Etruscan augury, had guided their migration to Rome and helped secure his throne. After 38 years, he was assassinated. He was succeeded by Servius Tullius, whose origins remain shrouded in conflicting legends, one calling him a noble foundling, another an Etruscan adventurer named Mustana. Servius Tullius reshaped Roman society through systematic reform. He introduced the census, divided citizens into 5 wealth-based classes, extended voting rights to commoners, and expanded Rome's boundaries to include the Quirinal, Viminal, and Esquiline hills. He constructed the Servian Wall, enclosing all 7 hills within a single unified defense.
Yet his reign ended violently. His successor and son-in-law, Tarquinius Superbus, murdered him and seized power. The seventh king earned his name well, Superbus, meaning the proud or the arrogant.
The final chapter of Roman monarchy arrived not through battle, but through outrage. The rape of Lucretia by the king's son Sextus Tarquinius and her subsequent suicide ignited a revolt among Rome's noble families. Led by Lucius Junius Brutus, the king's own nephew, the aristocracy expelled the Tarquin dynasty from Rome in 509 BC, abolishing the monarchy forever. The founding myths, the seven kings, the Etruscan legacy, all of it had brought Rome to this threshold. Yet the story of Rome's kings and its ancient founding myths were only the beginning. For once the Romans abolished their monarchy, they built something far more ambitious, a republic that would carry them from a single city on the Tiber to the shores of the entire Mediterranean world.
Chapter 2: Eagles over the Mediterranean. The rise of the Roman Republic. Over centuries, Rome shaped a government unlike any the ancient world had seen. A careful balance of power distributed among consuls, senators, and assemblies. 2 consuls, elected each year, held the highest authority, yet each could veto the other, preventing any single voice from ruling alone. Below them, praetors administered law, censors counted citizens, quaestors managed finances, and aediles oversaw daily city life. Together, these offices formed a quiet architecture of shared power, holding the republic together through precedent rather than written mandate. The Roman Republic's design rested on one essential principle. No single person should hold unchecked power. Yet in practice, this balance depended less on law than on the willingness of powerful men to respect unwritten traditions. The Senate held great influence over finances and foreign affairs, though it could not formally pass binding laws on its own. Popular assemblies gave citizens the power to vote, to elect, and to declare war. Yet the military commanders who won distant glory increasingly answered to their soldiers rather than to Rome itself. For nearly 2 centuries, from roughly 495 to 287 BCE, the plebeians, Rome's common people, waged a peaceful but persistent struggle against patrician privilege. They walked away from the city in organized mass strikes, refusing to fight or labor until their demands were heard. Through these quiet acts of collective defiance, they slowly reshaped Rome from the inside. By 287 BCE, the Lex Hortensia made plebeian assembly resolutions binding on all Romans, a transformation that turned an aristocratic oligarchy into something closer to a republic of equals. Among the great achievements born from the conflict of the orders, none proved more enduring than the law of the 12 Tables. Inscribed on bronze tablets and displayed publicly in the Roman Forum around 449 BCE, these laws transformed invisible custom into visible, readable text. For the first time, a plebeian citizen could know the law that governed his life, rather than trusting a patrician magistrate's interpretation. The 12 Tables became the foundation upon which all Roman law, and much of Western legal tradition, would eventually be built, quietly outlasting the empire itself.
Rome did not conquer the Italian peninsula in a single campaign, but through centuries of slow, deliberate expansion. The Samnite Wars, 3 long conflicts stretching from 343 to 290 BCE,
broke the power of the highland tribes of central Italy and opened the south. Roads like the Appian Way stretched southward, binding conquered territories to Rome with stone and mortar. Colonies were planted, treaties signed, and local communities were woven into Rome's expanding network of allies, each bound to supply soldiers when Rome called, tightening the Republic's hold across the entire peninsula.
Before Rome's mastery of the Mediterranean was settled, one king from across the Adriatic dared to challenge it. Pyrrhus of Epirus, summoned by the Greek city of Tarentum, crossed into Italy in 280 BCE with war elephants, disciplined phalanx formations, and brilliant tactical instincts. He defeated Rome at Heraclea and again at Asculum, yet his victories cost him so dearly in soldiers that they offered no lasting advantage. History remembers his name not for triumph, but for the warning carried in it. A victory won at too great a cost is no victory at all. Rome's greatest test of will came not from Italian neighbours, but from across the sea, where Carthage, a great maritime power of North Africa, controlled trade routes, islands, and ambitions. The First Punic War began in 264 BCE over Sicily and lasted 23 years, drawing both powers into land and naval battles of exhausting scale. Rome, never a seafaring nation, built an entire navy and learned to fight on water, ultimately destroying Carthage's fleet at the Aegean Islands in 241 BCE. Sicily became Rome's first overseas province, and a warning to every power that shared the Mediterranean's shores. Peace did not last long between Rome and Carthage. The Carthaginian general Hamilcar Barca never accepted defeat as permanent, rebuilding his power through the conquest of Iberia and instilling his hatred of Rome into his young son Hannibal, who swore an oath of eternal enmity. When Hannibal assumed command in 221 BCE, he moved swiftly, crossing the Pyrenees, marching through Gaul, and then doing what Rome believed impossible, leading his army, 30,000 infantry, 15,000 cavalry, and 37 war elephants, across the snow-covered Alps in winter. He descended into Italy like a storm no one had prepared for. In the years that followed, Hannibal delivered Rome 3 catastrophic blows: at Trebia in 218 BCE, at Lake Trasimene in 217 BCE, and finally at Cannae in 216 BCE. At Cannae, he encircled and annihilated a Roman force of roughly 86,000 soldiers in a single day, a feat of double envelopment that military commanders would study for centuries. Rome lost perhaps 150,000 men in 3 years of war, nearly a fifth of its adult male population. Yet Rome did not surrender. Instead, it appointed the cautious Quintus Fabius Maximus, who chose patience over battle and slowly starved Hannibal's supply lines into exhaustion. Rome's salvation came through a young general who had survived Cannae and refused to be defined by it. Scipio Africanus carried the war to Carthage's own homeland, landing in North Africa in 204 BCE and forcing Hannibal's recall from Italy. At Zama in 202 BCE, Scipio turned Hannibal's own tactics against him, neutralizing the war elephants, outflanking the Carthaginian line, and winning a decisive victory that ended the Second Punic War. Carthage surrendered its empire, its fleet, and its freedom. Then, in 146 BCE, after a third and final war, Rome destroyed Carthage utterly. The city burned for days, and 50,000 survivors were sold into slavery. Rome's victories abroad returned home carrying gifts no republic could easily survive. Greek culture, enslaved populations numbering in the millions, and wealth concentrated in the hands of a very few. Small farmers, displaced by slave-worked estates, flooded into the cities, and the brothers Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus died violent deaths for daring to redistribute land and feed the poor. The army, reformed by Marius to recruit the landless, became loyal not to Rome, but to the generals who paid its soldiers and promised them land. The republic that had survived Hannibal's war elephants and the armies of Carthage would ultimately prove unable to survive the ambitions of its own greatest general, a man whose crossing of a small river in northern Italy would change the course of history forever.
Chapter 3. The Die is Cast. Caesar, Civil War, and the Birth of an Empire.
Long before Julius Caesar ever gazed upon the Rubicon River, a quieter revolution had already unfolded along the roads of Rome. In 88 BC, a general named Lucius Cornelius Sulla led 6 loyal legions down the Via Appia and crossed the sacred Pomerium, the ancient boundary within which no Roman soldier was permitted to bear arms. In doing so, he shattered a prohibition older than memory itself. Sulla's march proved something dangerous, that an army's loyalty to its commander could surpass its loyalty to the Roman state.
Sulla's precedent lingered over Rome for decades, like a shadow that never fully lifted. 3 men eventually emerged who understood that in a fractured republic, political survival required allies, powerful ones. Around 60 BC, Julius Caesar, Pompey the Great, and Marcus Licinius Crassus formed a secret arrangement that historians would later call the First Triumvirate. It was never a formal institution, never enshrined in law. Merely 3 ambitious men, combining Caesar's political cunning, Pompey's military prestige, and Crassus's extraordinary wealth to overcome a Senate that had blocked each of them in turn.
Caesar used the political cover of the triumvirate to secure the one thing he needed most, a provincial command in Gaul. What followed was 8 years of relentless campaigning that reshaped the ancient world. From the defeated Helvetii in 58 BC to the fierce Nervi, the maritime Veneti, and Germanic tribes across the Rhine, Caesar's legions systematically subdued one people after another. Yet Caesar was building something beyond conquest. With each campaign, he accumulated vast war spoils, doubled his soldiers' pay, and cultivated the kind of fierce personal devotion that no Senate decree could manufacture.
In 52 BC, a chieftain of the Arverni tribe rose to unify the fractured tribes of Gaul beneath a single banner. Vercingetorix travelled across the land, invoking a shared Celtic identity, implementing scorched earth strategies to deny Rome its supplies, and assembling a coalition that brought even rival tribes together in common cause. At the fortified hilltop settlement of Alesia, he gathered tens of thousands of warriors and awaited a massive relief army. Caesar responded with a stroke of engineering genius, constructing 2 concentric walls of fortification, trapping the Gauls within while holding the relief forces without. Alesia fell in October of 52 BC. Vercingetorix surrendered to Caesar, riding out to lay his weapons at the Roman commander's feet, an image that sealed Gallic independence in defeat. For Gaul, the long age of Celtic freedom was quietly ending, its tribes absorbed into the vast machinery of Roman civilization. But for Caesar, Alesia was only the beginning. He returned to Rome carrying extraordinary wealth, 9 devoted legions whose men would follow him anywhere, and a reputation so vast that the Senate had once granted him 15 unprecedented days of public thanksgiving, longer than any Roman general had ever received before.
While Caesar was reshaping Gaul, the fragile balance of the triumvirate was dissolving. In 53 BC, Marcus Crassus led a Roman army east against the Parthian Empire and suffered catastrophic defeat at the Battle of Carrhae. Approximately 20,000 Roman soldiers perished, and Crassus himself was killed during failed negotiations, leaving the Republic without the one man who had balanced Caesar and Pompey against each other. With Crassus gone, there was nothing left to prevent the 2 remaining giants from turning toward one another. Political tensions hardened into ultimatums, and the Senate moved to strip Caesar of his command.
In the final months of 50 BC, the Senate demanded that Caesar disband his legions and return to Rome as a private citizen before standing for any future consulship. Caesar countered that Pompey should simultaneously surrender his own command in Spain, a proposal that passed the Senate by an overwhelming majority, yet remained unresolved amid deepening political paralysis. By January 49 BC, the standoff had hardened beyond negotiation. Caesar stood at the banks of a shallow river, the Rubicon, the boundary of his lawful command. To cross it with his army was treason. He paused, contemplating the full enormity of what lay on the other side.
According to the ancient historian Suetonius, Caesar spoke just 4 words before crossing. Alea iacta est. The die is cast. With those words, he acknowledged that the moment of decision had passed, and fortune alone would govern what came next. Caesar and his Legion 13 Gemini crossed the Rubicon, and within days the Republic trembled. Towns and cities surrendered without resistance as Caesar's forces swept south through Italy, Pompeii and the Senate fleeing to Greece. The civil war Caesar had long prepared for, through a decade of wealth, loyalty, and conquest, had finally begun, its outcome still entirely uncertain.
On the 9th of August, 48 BC, the 2 great armies of the Roman world met on the plains of Pharsalus in Greece. Pompey positioned his cavalry on his left flank, intending to crush Caesar's outnumbered horsemen and sweep around the Roman line. Caesar anticipated the maneuver and concealed a 4th line of veteran infantry, ordering them to drive their spears upward into the oncoming cavalry rather than cast them as javelins. Pompey's horses broke and fled. Caesar's veterans wheeled around the exposed Pompeian flank and shattered the line. Pompey himself escaped to Egypt, where, stepping ashore near Pelusium, he was assassinated by courtiers of the young pharaoh Ptolemy XIII. Caesar's victory left him master of the Roman world, and the Senate responded by heaping upon him extraordinary honors, including the title of Dictator Perpetuo, the right to wear royal dress, and the first living Roman portrait placed upon a coin. He enacted sweeping reforms, creating the Julian calendar of 365 days with leap years, expanding citizenship to provincial peoples, redistributing land to veterans, and expanding the Senate. Yet success bred fear. On the 15th of March, 44 BC, approximately 60 senators, including trusted men Caesar had pardoned, gathered in the Curia of Pompeii and struck him 23 times. The Republic's defenders believed they had saved it. Instead, they had unleashed a far deeper chaos.
From Caesar's death erupted another generation of civil war, proscriptions, battles, and the slow exhaustion of a republic that could no longer sustain itself. The Second Triumvirate, legally formed in 43 BC among Octavian, Mark Antony, and Lepidus, wielded powers that no informal alliance like the first had ever possessed. Yet even this arrangement could not hold. At the Battle of Actium in 31 BC, Octavian's fleet shattered the combined forces of Antony and Cleopatra, ending the last great Roman civil war. By 27 BC, the Senate bestowed upon Octavian the titles of Augustus and Princeps, first citizen, draping autocracy in the quiet robes of republican tradition. With Augustus seated as the first emperor of Rome, an age of extraordinary stability and achievement was about to unfold, a golden era that would see the empire reach its greatest extent and leave behind monuments that still stand as wonders of human achievement.
Chapter 4: Pax Romana, the Golden Age of the Roman Empire.
After a century of civil war, Rome found stillness beneath a single, careful hand. In 27 BCE, Augustus established the Principate, a system that preserved the appearance of the Republic, while quietly concentrating all true power within himself. He reorganized the Senate, standardized the silver denarius, and divided the empire into orderly provinces. He restored 82 temples in a single year, reviving old gods and older loyalties. Through census systems, new taxes, and moral legislation, he rebuilt not just the city, but the very soul of Rome. The dynasty Augustus founded, the Julio-Claudians, would rule Rome for nearly a century, each emperor leaving a different mark upon the empire. Tiberius governed through fear and delegated dangerous authority to his praetorian prefect. Caligula, who reigned only 4 years, made claims of divinity and descended into erratic cruelty before his assassination. Claudius, dismissed by the Senate as unworthy, proved a capable administrator who brought Britain under Roman rule. Nero began with generosity, but ended in tyranny, dying by his own hand in 68 CE, leaving no heir and closing a dynasty.
Then came a period that historians would long remember as perhaps the finest hour of Roman governance. Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, and Marcus Aurelius, the 5 good emperors, ruled in succession from 96 to 180 CE. Each was chosen not by blood, but by merit, adopted by his predecessor, and proven in experience before assuming power. The 18th century historian Edward Gibbon, reflecting upon this era, wrote that it represented the period in all of human history when the condition of humanity was most happy and prosperous. It was a reign of wisdom, built upon wisdom.
Among the 5 good emperors, Trajan stands apart as the great conqueror. He led 2 successive wars against the Dacian kingdom between 101 and 106 CE, ultimately defeating King Decebalus and annexing Dacia's rich gold and silver mines, yielding £500,000 of gold for Rome's treasury. To commemorate these campaigns, Trajan commissioned a towering column in his forum, 126 feet high, wound with a continuous spiral of carved scenes depicting every movement of the wars. No dead Roman soldiers appear among its carvings, only legionaries building, marching, and civilizing, an image of a Rome that could not be defeated. At its greatest extent in 117 CE, The Roman Empire stretched across approximately 5 million square kilometers, spanning 3 continents and uniting nearly 60 million people. From the Atlantic coast of Hispania to the shores of the Euphrates, from Britain's cold northern shores to the sun-baked sands of North Africa, one empire held the known world together. Yet Trajan's successor, Hadrian, looked upon these vast conquests and made a deliberate choice. Rather than expand further, he abandoned the eastern territories Trajan had seized, declaring that Rome's purpose was to govern and civilize what it already held, not to endlessly reach beyond its grasp.
Hadrian's most enduring monument to his philosophy of boundaries was built not in Rome, but in the far north of Britain. Beginning in 122 CE, construction began on a wall stretching 73 miles across the width of the island, from the River Tyne in the east to the Solway Firth in the west. For nearly 300 years, it marked the northwestern edge of the Roman world. Soldiers from Syria, Belgium, and Spain garrisoned its forts and mile castles, far from their homelands. Archaeological discoveries beneath its stones have revealed bathhouses with flushing toilets, inscribed centurion stones, and the quiet evidence of a remarkably multicultural daily life.
Connecting this vast empire was a road network of extraordinary scale. At its height, Rome's public road system covered approximately 74,600 miles, with recent surveys suggesting nearly 300,000 kilometers of roads in total when secondary routes are included. Roman engineers used sophisticated surveying instruments to carve roads in near straight lines across mountains, valleys, and rivers, layering foundations of stone, sand, and compacted gravel beneath tight-fitting paving stones. More than 8,000 milestones, inscribed with Latin distances, still stand scattered across the former empire. These roads were not merely paths, they were the arteries through which armies marched, merchants travelled, and ideas moved across the ancient world.
Equally remarkable were the aqueducts that carried fresh water across vast distances. Roman engineers exploited a gentle downhill gradient, allowing water to flow continuously through stone channels without any pumps. By the imperial period, 11 major aqueducts delivered approximately 1 million cubic meters of water daily to Rome alone. The Aqua Virgo, built in 19 BCE, still flows beneath the streets of Rome today, feeding the Trevi Fountain. In Gaul, the Pont du Gard stretched 275 meters across a river valley, rising 50 meters on 3 tiers of graceful stone arches, a silent declaration that Roman engineering could shape even the landscape itself. At the heart of Rome's cultural spectacle, begun under Emperor Vespasian in 72 CE and completed 8 years later under Titus, the elliptical amphitheatre could hold between 50,000 and 80,000 spectators, who entered through 80 arched gateways to witness gladiatorial combat, animal hunts, dramatic reenactments, and elaborate public games. The inaugural games under Titus lasted 100 days, during which more than 9,000 animals were killed. Modern research has revised the popular image of gladiatorial combat. Mortality rates in the 1st century were approximately 10 to 13% per bout, as live gladiators represented significant financial investments for those who owned and trained them.
Away from the grandeur of marble forums and roaring arenas, most Romans lived quiet and crowded lives in towering apartment buildings called insulae. These structures rose 8 to 10 stories high, housing labourers, merchants and freedmen in small rooms stacked above ground-floor shops and taverns. Fire and structural collapse were constant dangers, and the Roman satirist Juvenal documented the few meagre possessions a poor resident might lose in a moment's disaster. Yet, even in these cramped vertical neighbourhoods, life was vivid. Children playing in courtyards, neighbours sharing news, and the warm smells of thermopolia drifting through the streets, where Romans bought hot stews and bread without cooking hearths of their own.
The last of the 5 good emperors, Marcus Aurelius, spent much of his reign not in Rome's marble halls, but in cold frontier camps along the Danube, commanding wars against the Marcomanni and Quadi tribes. There, amid the hardship and mortality of the frontier, he composed his Meditations in Greek, 12 books of private philosophical reflection on duty, impermanence, and the stoic acceptance of suffering. He never intended them to be read by the world. When Marcus Aurelius died in 180 CE and was succeeded by his son Commodus, the historian Gibbon marked it as the moment Rome's fortune began its long, slow term. But beneath the gleaming marble of Rome's golden age lay shadows that history has never fully illuminated, mysteries, conspiracies, vanished legions, and buried secrets that continue to puzzle the world's greatest historians to this day.
Chapter 5: Shadows of Rome. Mysteries, Secrets, and Unanswered Questions. Rome was never simply a city of marble and order. Beneath its grand facades lay shadows, secrets buried in ash, fire, and the slow passage of centuries. Some of these mysteries concern moments of catastrophe, others concern men who shaped the empire, and others concern things lost so completely that only faint traces remain. Together, they form a quieter history, one written not in the records of emperors, but in the silences between the stones.
In the summer of AD 64, a fire broke out near the Circus Maximus and swept through Rome for 6 days, consuming entire districts. 3 historians, Tacitus, Suetonius, and Cassius Dio, recorded these events, yet no eyewitness accounts survived. Tacitus, writing some 60 years after the fire, is considered the most reliable among them, drawing on public records and maintaining careful restraint in assigning blame. Even so, the full truth of that terrible night has never been fully recovered.
The most persistent accusation against Emperor Nero was that he deliberately ordered the fire to clear space for his extravagant palace. Yet the historical record quietly resists this conclusion. Nero was absent in Antium when the fire began, and upon returning, he opened his own gardens to shelter victims, arranged food supplies, and enacted building reforms requiring fire-resistant construction. The accusations appear to have originated among the ruling elite who distrusted him, not from the ordinary Romans who benefited most from his relief efforts.
Seeking to redirect suspicion, Nero blamed the Christians for the fire. The early Christian community in Rome was already viewed with deep mistrust. They refused traditional Roman worship, gathered in private, and were seen as threatening civic order. The persecution that followed was catastrophic. Christians were subjected to brutal public executions, burned alive, crucified, and killed in spectacles designed to entertain the populace. This marked the first empire-wide persecution of Christians,
establishing a pattern that would endure for centuries.
Modern archaeology has added a quieter kind of evidence to this ancient debate. Excavations on the Palatine Hill, beginning in 1981, uncovered physical traces of the fire: charred temple steps, iron grates warped by intense heat, and basalt blocks shattered by thermal stress. These discoveries mapped the fire's reach across commercial and elite districts alike. Yet they also supported the conclusion that the catastrophe arose from structural vulnerability, Rome's dense timber neighborhoods and narrow streets, rather than deliberate criminal intent.
Emperor Caligula remains one of Rome's most enduring mysteries, a ruler whose reputation was almost entirely constructed by his enemies. The accounts of Suetonius and Cassius Dio, written decades after his death, are colored by the hostility of the senatorial class who conspired against him. What is confirmed across multiple sources is his pattern of political executions, public humiliation of senators, and lavish spending. The more spectacular stories, appointing his horse as consul, absurd military orders, are now regarded by modern historians as fabrications or political exaggerations.
After Caligula's assassination in AD 41, the Senate and Emperor Claudius deliberately amplified accusations of madness and tyranny. The motivation was clear: to legitimize the murder, discredit any remaining supporters, and secure Claudius's precarious position. Attacks on Caligula's memory began almost immediately, proceeding without restraint because the emperor could no longer defend himself. Archaeological evidence, however, confirms at least one extraordinary truth. The two massive pleasure barges Caligula built on Lake Nemi, complete with marble floors and plumbing, were discovered exactly as described when the lake was drained in 1929.
Somewhere beneath the northern landscape of Britain, the fate of Rome's 9th Legion remains unresolved. The last confirmed record of the Legio IX Hispana is a stone inscription from Eboracum, modern York, dated to AD 108, commemorating the rebuilding of a fortress gate. After that date, the legion vanishes entirely from Roman records. By AD 122, a different legion occupied York in its place. No mass graves, no battlefield monuments, no commemorative inscriptions were ever found to explain where nearly 5,000 soldiers disappeared.
3 competing theories attempt to explain the 9th Legion's disappearance. The oldest and most popular holds that the legion was destroyed in a revolt by northern tribes in Britain during the late 110s, marching north into Caledonia, never to return. A second theory proposes the legion was transferred to the Eastern Empire and later destroyed fighting the Parthians. A third suggests the unit was reorganized or renamed on the Rhine frontier, its identity quietly absorbed. Stamped tiles found in Nijmegen hint at movement beyond Britain, but no single theory has yet been proven. Beneath the streets of modern Rome, a hidden world of tunnels, temples, and catacombs stretches for hundreds of kilometers. Structures like the Cloaca Maxima, the great sewer built in the 6th century BC, still carry water to the Tiber today. The Basilica of San Clemente descends through 3 distinct historical layers: a pagan Mithraic temple, an early Christian basilica, and later medieval foundations stacked one atop the other. Beneath the Colosseum, gladiators and wild animals once waited in a subterranean maze of galleries before ascending into the light above. Rome's mysteries do not end at any single ruin or inscription. They drift through the historical record like smoke. The vanished treasures of the Jerusalem temple carried to Rome, then to Carthage, then to Constantinople, and then into silence. They echo in the treasure hoards of Britain and the Rhine frontier, buried by provincial elites as the empire withdrew, never reclaimed. They linger in the underground chambers of the Domus Aurea, sealed beneath the baths of Trajan for 1,000 years before a young man fell through the earth and rediscovered them by accident. The mysteries of Rome are as numerous as the stones of its ancient roads, but perhaps the greatest mystery of all is how an empire of such extraordinary power could unravel, and whether the civilization it created ever truly came to an end.
Chapter 6. The Long Goodbye, Decline, Fall, and the Eternal Legacy of Rome. For centuries, Rome had seemed eternal, a civilization woven so deeply into the world that its unraveling felt unthinkable. Yet, between AD 235 and 284, something broke. Emperors rose and fell with terrible swiftness, more than 20 in 50 years, while the empire fractured into 3 competing states. This period, known as the Crisis of the 3rd Century, was born from the assassination of Alexander Severus, whose own soldiers turned against him, setting loose an age of military anarchy that nearly swallowed everything Rome had built. The plagues deepened every wound the empire suffered. The Antonine Plague, arriving around AD 165, swept through cities and legions alike, claiming perhaps 7.5 million lives from a population of 75 million. Then came the Plague of Cyprian, striking hardest between AD 249 and 262, emptying Alexandria of more than half its people and stripping the legions of the soldiers needed to hold the frontiers. The cause of the Cyprian plague remains unidentified even today, its origins as mysterious as its devastation was thorough. Into this fractured world came Aurelian, a soldier emperor from the Illyrian provinces who earned the title Restorer of the World. Between 271 and 274, he reconquered the breakaway Palmyrene Empire in the east, capturing its formidable ruler Queen Zenobia, and then turned westward to defeat the Gallic Empire, reuniting 3 separated worlds under one Roman authority. His reign lasted only 5 years before his death in 275, yet in those years he pulled the empire back from the edge of permanent dissolution, laying the ground for what would come next. Diocletian arrived in 284 and transformed what remained of the crisis into something manageable. He divided governance among 4 co-rulers, 2 senior Augusti and 2 junior Caesars, a system called the Tetrarchy, designed to govern an empire too vast for any single person. He also restructured provinces, reformed taxation, and separated military from civil authority, reshaping imperial administration from the ground up. His edict on maximum prices, however, failed quietly. Merchants vanished into shadow markets rather than submit, and inflation continued its patient erosion of daily life.
In the winter of 302, Diocletian moved against the Christians of his empire. On February 23rd, 303, he ordered the destruction of a great church at Nicomedia, the burning of its scriptures, and the seizure of its treasures, beginning what history remembers as the Great Persecution. For nearly 8 years, edicts stripped Christians of legal rights, demolished their places of worship, and demanded public sacrifice to the old gods.
Yet the persecution varied greatly across the empire. Fierce in the east under Galerius, comparatively mild in the western provinces of Gaul and Britain.
Constantine emerged from within the tetrarchy's structure to become one of Rome's most transformative rulers. On October 28, 312, he defeated his rival Maxentius at the Battle of Milvian Bridge, his soldiers reportedly bearing the Chi Rho symbol of Christ upon their shields. Contemporary writers, Lactantius and Eusebius, recorded visions of crosses and divine commands the night before battle. Whether interpreted as dream, vision, or legend, the event shifted the course of an empire. Within a year, Constantine and his co-emperor Licinius issued the Edict of Milan, extending religious toleration to Christians throughout the Roman world. Constantine did not stop at toleration. He convened the Council of Nicaea in 325, gathering approximately 318 bishops from across the empire to settle a fracturing theological debate about the nature of Christ. The council declared Arianism a heresy and introduced the term homoousios, meaning of one substance, affirming that the Son shared the same divine nature as the Father. From this gathering emerged the Nicene Creed, a statement of faith still spoken in churches across the world today. Constantine also founded Constantinople upon the ancient site of Byzantium in 324, a new capital poised between continents.
In 395, Emperor Theodosius I became the last ruler to govern a united Roman Empire. Upon his death, the empire passed to his two sons, Arcadius in the east and Honorius in the west, and the division that followed proved permanent. The Western Empire grew increasingly fragile, its armies filled with barbarian federates whose loyalty belonged first to their own communities. Alaric the Visigoth, having fought and sacrificed for Rome at the Frigidus, felt abandoned and turned his forces toward the empire he had served. On August 24, 410, the gates of Rome were quietly opened, and Visigoths entered the Eternal City for the first time in nearly 800 years.
St. Jerome, writing from Bethlehem, captured the world's despair in a single trembling phrase: "If Rome can perish, what can be safe?" The sack lasted 3 days, and while restrained by ancient standards, its psychological wound ran far deeper than any physical destruction. The Western Empire endured another 6 decades after 410, diminished and eroded, its territory carved by federate kingdoms, and its emperors increasingly dependent on barbarian generals. Attila the Hun pressed westward in 451, and again in 452, devastating northern Italy, yet disease, logistical strain, and a legendary negotiation with Pope Leo I turned him back before Rome fell to his hand.
On September 4, 476, a young emperor named Romulus Augustulus was deposed by the Germanic commander Odoacer, who sent the Western imperial regalia to Constantinople and declared himself King of Italy. Some historians look instead to 480, when the last recognized Western emperor, Julius Nepos, died, as the truer ending. Others suggest the transformation was so gradual that no single date fully captures the dissolution. Roman law, Roman language, and Roman administrative structures continued under their new Germanic rulers. In the east, Constantinople endured, its citizens still calling themselves Romans, for nearly 1,000 years more, until 1453.
What followed was not silence, but transformation.
Roman law breathed on through the corpus juris civilis of Justinian, shaping legal systems across Europe and Latin America for centuries. The Romance languages, Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Romanian, all descended from the Latin tongue of common soldiers and merchants. The Roman Catholic Church inherited the empire's dioceses, its administrative hierarchies, its very geography of authority. Columns and domes drawn from Roman tradition rose again in the capitals of modern nations. Rome did not simply disappear into the dust of history. It dissolved into the very foundations of the world we live in today, its laws woven into our courts, its language breathing inside our words, its roads still pointing toward horizons that generations of its citizens once dared to cross.